Hello and welcome to Part 2 of Brownfields 101, Addressing Environmental Issues at Historic Properties. My name is Rebecca Otte and I'm the Statewide Brownfield Coordinator at the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. In Part 1, I provided a general overview of the Brownfields program, talked about the environmental process, and how the Brownfields Revitalization Act addressed liability concerns to help facilitate the redevelopment of vacant and underutilized properties. In Part 2, we're going to go over how to access brownfield resources and some tips for working with your local brownfields program. So let's talk about what you're probably most interested in, brownfield resources. There are several different pots of brownfield funding and technical assistance options to help you address environmental issues at your site. First, let's talk about the local programs that might be able to assist you. The way it works, each year EPA has a national competition for brownfield funding, so local government and nonprofit entities are eligible to apply, and they can apply for funding to cover brownfields related planning activities, to conduct environmental assessments at brownfield sites, and to develop cleanup plans. They can then use this funding to provide assistance to private and public entities. So current brownfield programs in Louisiana include the City of Shreveport, the Monroe-West Monroe-Ouachita Parish Coalition, the City of Bastrop, Acadiana Planning Commission, South Central Planning and Development Commission, and the Regional Planning Commission for the New Orleans metro area. We also just found out that the City of Alexandria was recently awarded funding. In addition, the City of Baton Rouge, City of New Orleans, and Jefferson Parish have all had brownfield programs in the past and are in the process of kind of reinvigorating their programs. The Helpful Links document has links to each of the current brownfield program websites. How it normally works for the assessment and cleanup planning stage is you would apply to your local brownfield program. The Brownfield Program's environmental consultant will conduct the investigation, prepare the cleanup plan, whatever you're requesting, and then provide you with the document. If you hear me say something that implies that you would receive the funding to conduct assessment or develop a cleanup plan, just note I'm probably misspeaking. I kind of have a habit of saying providing brownfield funding instead of brownfield assistance or resources. One question we get a lot is, can I be reimbursed for assessment work I've already completed? The answer is no. There are some requirements that come along with EPA funding regarding competition when you're selecting a contractor, developing a quality assurance project plan prior to collecting any data that need to be taken care of, and so those are handled by the local brownfield program, so they can't reimburse you for work that you've already done because it doesn't meet those requirements. Please note each program is different and has different levels of funding available. They have to apply for funding through that national competition. It takes about a year from when they apply to when the funding is available. The funding is also tied to a work plan with EPA, so the scope for your project needs to fit within that work plan. If their application for assessment funding, the local entities also need to define a target area where they're going to focus their efforts. And while that entity can sometimes use the funding at a site outside that target area, but was still within that jurisdiction, EPA really wants to see the majority of the funding go to sites within that target area. So this is where developers, real estate folks, community groups can help out. One of the challenges for the person writing the grant is often to identify that target area that has brownfield sites that also have a good chance of being redeveloped if the environmental issues were addressed. The development community has a much better handle on where is redevelopment happening and where is that potential. So developers, real estate folks, community groups can help identify these areas and connect the local brownfield programs to people that would be interested in being involved in the process. Keep in mind that in order to be competitive for funding, local governments and nonprofits are looking for target areas and sites that really need this assistance and would address an environmental justice concern. Basically, if you're looking at a site and it's in a fairly affluent community and it already has a really good chance of being redeveloped without brownfield funding, it's probably not best for the brownfield program. And honestly, because of the way the market works, it's probably not a good fit with the Brownfields timeline. So now let's talk about funding for cleanup through local brownfield programs. Every other year, government and nonprofit entities can apply for funding to set up a brownfield cleanup revolving loan fund to provide low interest loans with flexible repayment options for eligible projects. So this is pass-through funding. So you would apply for a loan, which is basically more like a line of credit. As eligible cleanup expenses are incurred, you would request reimbursement from the loan fund. And then once the cleanup is complete, you would repay the loan in accordance with the repayment terms in the loan agreement. So normally these are low interest loans with flexible repayment options, and the repayment is normally delayed until either the site is generating income or a certain number of years after the cleanup is complete to allow time for redevelopment. We currently have one active local fund coalition with the South Central Planning and Development Commission. That's where it's housed, and it's a coalition with the Acadiana Planning Commission that covers the Lafayette area, the city of Lake Charles, and the city of Baton Rouge. So if you have a project in one of those areas that needs cleanup funding, you might want to look into applying for a cleanup loan. Both public and private entities are eligible to apply, and part of the loan may be forgiven if it's to a government or a nonprofit entity. As I mentioned in part 1, Brownfields funding can also be used for planning activities. EPA realized that while the Brownfields program was addressing the environmental concerns at a site, there were obstacles that needed to be addressed or at least looked into in order to move the site to redevelopment. So now local brownfield programs can choose to incorporate planning activities into their grant scopes of work to help facilitate the reuse of the property once the site's cleaned up. It really helps if the development community is involved with these planning activities. Often you're the ones who know what information might be helpful in order to spur revitalization in an area. So things that planning activities can include, would a site reuse assessment that identifies what a brownfield site or a target area has going for it, as well as some of the barriers for redevelopment, would that be helpful? Would a site be more marketable if a land use assessment was performed to understand the regulatory opportunities and constraints for a site like zoning, historic or economic designations, special districts, incentives, that type of thing? Would a market study be useful to see what reuses might work well at a site or a target area, or maybe even evaluating available and needed infrastructure for future development? So you can do one, you can do a mix of those. What works best for your target area? Redevelopment of brownfield sites, and I'm sure you know this from working on historic sites, definitely a team effort. So it really is essential that the brownfield grantees, which are government and nonprofit entities, partner with the development community on these planning efforts to make sure that the information is actually going to be useful to facilitate the redevelopment of brownfield sites. So I encourage you, if you have a local brownfield program, to connect with them and see what they are currently working on as far as planning activities go, and talk about how you might be able to partner in the future. They can also include this in future applications for funding. So just keep in mind though that brownfields funding doesn't happen quickly, but it helps now if they kind of know what the future plans are out 2-3 years, so they can get started in the right direction and have the right resources available later on. So another resource is the State Brownfield Program housed at LDEQ. That's the program that I manage. LDEQ's Brownfield Program, we're focused on sites that are being redeveloped by a government or nonprofit entity, or those that are working with their local brownfield program. I would love to help everybody, and sometimes I try, but we really do have limited resources, so those are our focus areas. We can provide technical assistance for helping these sites work through the regulatory process. Please note that we don't take the place of hiring an environmental consultant, but we can work with your environmental consultant just to help facilitate the process. And as funding is available, LDEQ can provide brownfield assessments and cleanup plans through our targeted brownfield assessment program, where our environmental consultant performs the work and basically hands you a report that's similar to how it works with the local brownfield programs. Government and nonprofit entities are eligible to apply either for a site that they are planning on redeveloping or on behalf of a private entity for a site that they would benefit the community as a whole. Please note this program is currently on hold, but we're hoping to reinstate it in 2021. And as funding is available, we can also provide subawards to local brownfield programs, government entities, and nonprofits to assist with the assessment and cleanup of sites. So as I mentioned, both assessment and cleanup funding at the state level is limited at this time. However, we are very excited to announce that we have been selected for an $800,000 EPA Brownfield Cleanup Revolving Loan Fund, which will allow us to make low-interest loans to brownfield projects throughout the state, similar to the revolving loan fund housed at the South Central Planning and Development Commission. So both public and private entities will be able to apply for a cleanup loan. For this funding, you don't have to be working with a local brownfield program, but they can help you put together the various EPA documents that are going to be required for cleanup funding. We're hoping to have the program up and running by March 2021. And we're also planning on applying for an EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant this year to be able to expand our resources to perform environmental assessments and develop cleanup plans. Just be aware the soonest that funding would be available would be October of 2021. If you have questions about this funding or how to access it, please give me a call and we can talk about your project and see what might work. Just noting again, right now, we don't have any funding available, but it is in the works and we hope to have it in the future. Just a side note, dealing with the state and the state regulatory process, if you are working on a site that's already being assessed under LDEQ's regulatory process and the site's already been assigned to an LDEQ team leader, please make sure that you just stay engaged in that process and that your environmental consultant responds to DEQ's requests for information and follows up in a timely manner. One of my passions is just moving these sites to redevelopment quicker, and by having you stay involved in that process and make sure that your environmental consultant is responding accordingly really helps that process. Finally, if there isn't local or state funding available for a site, EPA also has a targeted brownfield assessment program to provide environmental assessments of sites. Please note this takes longer since they work through the Army Corps of Engineers, who then contracts with a local environmental firm. Also, if they conduct a phase 2 assessment, they only have a limited amount of funds, so they are sampling just to determine if contamination present. It's a cheaper, quicker way of seeing if there's an issue. Just note that if contamination is found, you may need to do additional sampling to meet LDEQ's investigation requirements. EPA is also a wealth of knowledge for other programs that can benefit your project overall, as well as technical assistance resources. Denise Williams, who's pictured on the right side in the pink dress, sends out a weekly email blast with other resources that may benefit brownfield projects. If you're interested in receiving that email blast, please send her a note at williams.denise@epa.gov. That's also in the helpful links document.